Chess, a 5-century-old game that is still popular even to this day, the objective is to capture your opponent's king while keeping your own safe. In this video, you will learn how to play chess. Let's talk about how the pieces move. So the first piece you'll need to know how to move is the king. This is the most important piece. The king just moves in any adjacent square, a diagonal or horizontal. After that, we'll be adding in the rooks. Rooks move in a horizontal or vertical line, basically just a straight line. After the rooks, we add in the bishops. Bishops move in a diagonal line, as seen here. After that, we get the queen, which is a mixture of the rook and bishop. Can move in a straight line or a diagonal line. This is often considered the most powerful piece in the game. So next up we have the knight. The knight moves in a very unique pattern. It's this octangular shape. Most people just memorize the moves by thinking of it as an L, so the knight will move over 2 and then over 1, or over 1 and then down 2. And then that will result in the 8 different moves. One important thing to note is that the knight is the only piece that can jump over other pieces in the game. So even if there's, say, this queen here, and this bishop here, and this bishop here, actually illegal, but the knight can just jump over them as if they didn't exist. And this is the only piece that can do that. The queen can't move through the bishop into the queen, just the knight. Finally, we're adding the pawns. The pawns make up the majority of the pieces in the game. There are 16 of them. The pawn has the most complicated movement set just because there's so much variety in it, and it's just different from other pieces. The pawn will move forward one space at a time, as seen here. The pawn, however, does not capture when moving forward. As you can see here, it cannot capture. The pawn captures in a diagonal direction. So if there's a pawn here, as you can see here, now this is circled, saying it can be captured. And same for the white pieces. So now we're getting the more situational or special moves. On the very first time a pawn moves, it can move forward 2 spaces. So, but again, it's only on the very first move, and it can't move 2 and then 2 again, only 1. Can't move 1 and then 2, that's illegal. There is another rule that goes with this, correlates with it, and it's called en passant, which is French for in passing. So if you do the double move, and there's a pawn there that is threatening, and this only works with a pawn, that is threatening the spot that it passed through, the pawn can take it as if the pawn moved through that spot. That's why it's called in passing. If you do it, and then, say, black does another move, this is no longer an option. It's only available for the very first time that white moves their piece past where your pawn's threatening. Again, this is only with pawns, so if I do it with a bishop, that doesn't work. I'll just be moving the bishop there. So next up we have what's known as pawn promotion. Since the pawn can only go forward during the game, they become kind of useless after, they pass their the enemy's pieces. So to compensate for this, they actually made it so that if you get your pawn to the end of the board, not like that though, if you get your pawn to the end of the board, it can be what's known as promoted. This is where the pawn is replaced by one of the 4 other pieces in the game. It's not the king. You can only ever have one king on the board at a time. Well, one for each color. And generally people will use a queen just because it's the most powerful of all the pieces, but there's reasons to use a knight, and then very, very situational reasons to do a bishop or rook. So now we have castling. Castling is when you move your king over and then the rook comes over to the other side. This is generally to help develop your rook and then just get your king to a safer position. The way this is done is the king moves over 2 squares to either side, and then the rook is moved just to the opposite side of the king. So if the king is castling queenside here, the king moves over 2 and the rook moves over 3. If the king's castling kingside, over 2, rook moves over 2. And would look like that. The king, however, cannot castle if either of the pieces have been moved. So if the rook is moved, you are no longer allowed to castle with this rook. If the king has moved at all during the game, he's no longer allowed to castle, period. So generally speaking, it's good to not move your king until you have to castle and then move it to castle. Another thing to note is that you can't castle through or into check. So this queen is threatening this square here. Since the king would be moving over 2 squares, it would be castling through check, and that's not legal, so that'd be considered an illegal move. The king also can't castle into check, so if this square was threatened by something else, it would be legal. However, the rook is allowed to pass through this square. So as you can see here, the bishop is threatening this square. You are still allowed to castle long because the king didn't touch this square. We only care about the king moving through check. So there are only a couple things left to know. That is who goes first. White always goes first, and it goes by turn. So white makes a move, black makes a move, white makes a move, black makes a move. And then it's just setting up the board. So it'll be king and queen next to each other, followed by the bishop, knight, and then rook. There are 2 rules to decide where the queen goes. The queen will always go on her own square, like this white queen and this dark queen here, dark queen on dark square. And the other rule for that is the white queen will always be on the left of the king. Now that you know how to play chess, perhaps even you can be a grandmaster someday.